the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
A very happy new year to each and every one of you. And John, my condolences. I didn't give Washington a chance in that game. The way they just ran up and down the field on your Crimson Tide was disheartening at best. I commend you for actually being able to get yourself up off the couch and come in today to do the program.
Yes, indeed. Well, since we're doing this, Alabama by 29 points. That was an amazing win. Amazing win.
Well, this is actually a very special pre-taped edition of EWTN's Open Line Monday. We don't know who won that football game.
No, we don't.
And, actually, I think we do, but technically we don't. Not many people giving Washington much of a chance in that contest, and I think for good reason. But at any rate, we are here for you with a very, very, very special pre-recorded program, so we won't be taking your phone calls today. We do have some folks lined up that were on hold from previous programs, so we may talk to some people on the phone. But primarily a mailbag edition of Open Line. With any time that we have left, we'll try to whittle down the Monday email folder for John Martignoni. I'm Jack Williams. The lovely and talented Elena Rodriguez is here producing the program. And I believe Rich Jesse is our celebrity call screener for anybody who does get through on the telephone during this special pre-tape for the day after New Year's. John Martignoni is in the house, the president and founder of the Bible Christian Society, director of the Office of the New Evangelization and Stewardship for the Diocese of Birmingham in Alabama. Can I get a roll tide?
Roll Tide.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. Very well.
Awesome.
Just
Awesome. Michael
loving
McCall.
this time of year.
We're actually on YouTube today as well, so our folks will be watching this for the first time on YouTube. Michael McCall pulling those strings for us behind the scenes. Shall we head straight to the phone since we have some folks waiting?
Sounds good to me.
Teresa's in the great state of Virginia listening. Well, she's not listening to the program, but she'll probably listen to it when it comes on live so she can hear how magnificent she sounded on the radio. Teresa, you're on with John Martignoni.
Hi, John.
Hey, Therese, how you doing?
Very good. Listen, I have two questions for you, and I'd like both of them answered if I could. If one takes up too much time, I don't want the time taken
Well,
up.
Therese, you're getting bossy in 2017.
I know. I'm getting bossy, you know. Okay, here's the first one. Can a non-Catholic, baptized or not, just one day decide in their heart that they want to go to confession and be forgiven? Is it possible?
A non-Catholic cannot receive the sacrament of confession, of reconciliation. What they can do, at least in talking with the priests, I've had a number of priests tell me that they are more than happy to have someone who is not Catholic come and talk to them and essentially confess their sins to them, but they cannot receive absolution through in the sacramental sense until they are have been brought fully into the Catholic Church.
Okay. I would love a further explanation on that, but I know you don't have time. The second question is this. Can a divorced but not remarried Catholic, husband or wife, and also not having their marriage annulled, so they're still married. I guess they're still married sacramentally because they don't have an annulment. Can they decide that they want to have sex?
Well, they can, and unfortunately they do, but it is a sin. It's the sin of adultery and or fornication. It depends on the status of the other individual involved. So, yes, it is a very serious matter, and it is an egregious sin. And if they're fully aware of what they're doing and so forth, it's very likely a mortal sin. in that instance. So that's why, a person who is a divorced Catholic, if they remarry, they can still receive communion if they refrain from having sexual relations with their new marriage partner. And let's say they got divorced and remarried without understanding the teachings of the church, so they didn't know what they were doing, or they got divorced and remarried before they became Catholic and they want to become Catholic, and they say, well, okay, we'll live, we will abstain from physical relations in order that we may fully participate in the life of the church. So the thing about having physical relations is very, very important, and that's why, yes, just because you're divorced, even if you're not remarried, having physical relations, you're still having physical relations outside the bonds of marriage, which is where the sin comes in. Okay?
But an annulment, then, even if they aren't annulled, they're still married sacramentally, or what does the...
Yeah, in the eyes of the church, they're still married. The sacrament is still in force. And even if they get an annulment, though, and they're still not remarried, if they have physical relations, it's still outside of marriage, and so it's still a sin. In that instance, it would be the sin of fornication rather than adultery, but essentially the same effect. Okay?
I think I'm making myself clear, because I'm not talking about, all I'm talking about is two people that are Catholics, that are baptized, get a civil divorce, but they don't get a Catholic annulment. They are still married sacramentally.
Oh, and they're still living together, and they have physical relations with physical relations with one another.
Yeah, I don't care if they're living together.
Yes, that is not a sin because they're still married in the eyes of the church.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering that. Well, I said, geez, that could be. Okay. Well, that answers my question, because I understand about annulments and stuff like that, and I understand about fornication.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I misunderstood. I wasn't picking up on that.
Sorry I didn't make myself clear enough for you, but thank you very much. That's very interesting. Okay.
Thank you, Therese. Appreciate the phone call. Now, and that would also be presuming that their marriage is a sacramental marriage.
Correct.
Now, the fact that they had a civil divorce might call that into question a bit. Certainly might at least bear a little looking into.
Yes. If the two Catholics, they get married in the Catholic Church, they both knew what they were doing, and they get a civil divorce, but they have not yet gone through the process of an annulment, which it bothers me. This is something I need to talk to some people about, that a lot of times the diocese will require you to get a civil divorce before you start the annulment process. In my view, that's backwards. But assuming they do that, they get the civil divorce, then the assumption basically is, as far as I understand it, that they are still married sacramentally in the eyes of the church.
The church will always take you at your word.
Until that annulment comes through. So the presumption is that were they to have relations, physical relations, that essentially it's still physical relations between husband and wife, and so that is not sinful. In the eyes of the state, they're divorced. In the eyes of the church, they're married.
Just getting started on a very special pre-taped edition here on this day after New Year's Day 2017. Who's written a check with the wrong date on it today? I want to know. Hands up. Open Line Monday rolls on with John Martignoni.
The central claim of Christianity is that God became a baby and was born 2 millennia ago and gave his life to save us. That's the most radical claim of any faith in history. At first glance, it seems absurd that God would do such a thing. And it would be absurd if God were into power and glory like us. But when God revealed himself, he showed us that he's more than we could have hoped for. He revealed that he is love. And if God is love, then the God made flesh makes perfect perfect sense. Love would do nothing less than enter our frail humanity as one of us. Sure, he could have come in the clouds in power, but he didn't come to wow us. He came to woo us. He didn't come looking for our submission. He came looking for our hearts. And when you think about it, can you imagine God being anything less radical, less absurd, or less beautiful than the love Christians claim he is? This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com.
Podcasts of Open Line are available within 24 hours of live broadcast. Go to EWTN.com and click on Multimedia.
This is Dale Ahlquist with a Chesterton Christmas Minute. G.K. Chesterton says that it is in the old Christmas carols that date from the Middle Ages that we find not only what makes Christmas poetic and soothing and stately, but what makes it exciting. The exciting quality of Christmas rests upon a great paradox, that the power and center of the whole universe may be found in something very small, a baby in a manger. And it's extraordinary to notice how completely this paradox of the manger was lost by the brilliant theologians, but was kept in the Christmas carols. The songs recall the main point of the story, that God once ruled the universe from a stable, and that the hands that made the stars were too small to reach the huge heads of the cattle. Want more than a minute? Chesterton.org.
This is Dr. Ray Guarendi, host of The Doctor Is In.
Hi, this is Teresa Tomeo from Catholic Connection.
This is Father Mitch Pacwa. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from all of us at the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Ringing in the new year here on EWTN's Open Line Monday with a special pre-tape program never before heard by human ears, unless you're a human named John, Jack, or Elena. And so we won't be taking your phone calls today, but we do have some folks that have been kind enough to give us a call, and some of them held over from a previous program. Others have been given the lowdown on our top secret taping, and they've been gracious enough to call us with their question. And Tom is one of those folks. He's on Eastern Long Island, New York, listens on EWTN.com. Tom, you're on with John Martignoni.
Yes, good afternoon, John.
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Very, very good. Question I have is, you see in the media, they talk about the Pew Research surveys, and they'll talk about how 35% of adult millennials, the generation, they're not affiliated with any religion. And if we can assume that the reason for that is poor catechesis, they either had very little education on religious training, or it was just poor to begin with, and basically it really wasn't their fault. Now, I'm making an assumption that it wasn't their fault. Can we assume then that the Catholic Church would not look at these people as being in a state of mortal sin, and hence, if they died under these circumstances, salvation would not be lost?
We have our first sweeping generality of the year. Congratulations, Tom.
Well, you sent me that email.
Well, yes, indeed. Okay, here's the deal. The church doesn't determine in a broad sense, okay, these people are in a state of mortal sin, these are not. These people probably are in hell, these probably are not. That's something that in the confessional, a priest, knowing circumstances of your life and based on your confession and so forth, or a spiritual advisor, outside of the confessional, might be able to determine something along those lines. But for people who are not in the church, it's very difficult to say, because of exactly what you're talking about. There's ignorance involved here, or there very possibly could be ignorance involved here, that would lessen the responsibility for a sin. And so a mortal sin may not be a mortal sin, because as you obviously know, one of the factors necessary for a mortal sin is knowledge that this is a sin. And if someone's been raised completely a-religious or irreligious, they may not know. They may, their parents may have shown them that, hey, it's okay to steal as long as, you don't get caught. Then it's okay, or it's okay to do this, or it's okay to do that, which are immoral actions. So here's what I would say. Let me give you, Tom, a verse first from Romans chapter 2, verse 13 and following. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. And Paul's being asked here about, you've got the Jews, the Jewish Romans, they have the law, the Old Testament law, and the Ten Commandments and all, versus the Gentile Christians who, they didn't have the Old Testament law. They didn't have the law. So let me go back to Romans 2:13. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. When Gentiles who have not the law do by nature what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. Why does he say that? Because they show that what the law requires is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts, or you might read ignorance here in some instances, their conflicting thoughts also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or perhaps excuse them on that day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. So what he's saying here is that ignorance, conflicting thoughts, not being properly formed in the faith, all the things that you were saying, it could excuse them on the day of judgment. It could also accuse them, because I always tell people, I say, I know of churches around here in Birmingham that have signs out front say, interested in the Catholic faith, call. To learn more about the Catholic faith, call. Stop in to learn about the Catholic faith. What if someone's driven past that sign 2, 3, 4 times a day, every day of their lives for 10, 20 years? Could you say that they're ignorant? Well, it's not invincible ignorance. Maybe it's a deliberate ignorance, in which case, now deliberate ignorance, does that excuse you from your sins? Probably not. Does invincible ignorance excuse you from your sins? Probably so. So it's just something that, in our day and age, I guess in any day and age, it's something very difficult to quantify, so it's very difficult to make a judgment call. But what I say to people is, listen, I think it's 1 Peter, maybe chapter 4 or so, Peter talks about how those of us, essentially Christians, are barely saved. So if Christians who have all of the sacraments, all of the avenues of grace that God has given to his church are barely saved, it's a difficult thing to toe the line, to hoe that row. If we're barely saved, what about those who have none of these avenues of grace? Are they really able to fully carry out what is written in their hearts by God without all these avenues of grace, without all this grace that God is wanting to give them, but has no way to do so because they're not in the church? So I always tell people, I say, look, it's not in the church's business to say who's damned and who's not, but basically the church says the best way to avoid being damned is to be an active Catholic who is very, very deep into their faith and very devout in their faith. That doesn't guarantee, but it's probably the best way to avoid being damned and making it into heaven. So it's on us when we come across folks who are ignorant of the faith, who are not Catholic and so forth, to do our best to plant seeds of the truth with them.
Is that helpful, Tom?
I was thinking of invincible ignorance, but I was not thinking of the fact that you could actually have deliberate, ignorance. That part I was not thinking of it.
Yeah, I have people all the time who I'll hear things like, look, I don't want to know. Oh,
that's amazing. That's
and it's like, well, oh, wow.
That's amazing.
And so I would imagine, I can't say for sure, but if I were a betting man, I'd bet, well, that's not going to be excused when all is said and done, because you don't want to know.
That is amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
All
Tom.
right,
We
Tom.
appreciate the phone call. God bless you during this new year. Hope you have a tremendous 2017. Next stop, Chickasaw, Oklahoma. Christy is in Oklahoma, listening on Oklahoma Catholic Radio. Christy, you're on with John Martignoni.
Hi, John.
Hey, Christy, how are you today?
I am blessed. How are you?
Same for me, thank you.
I have a question of if a Catholic marries a non-Catholic who has been married multiple times before their marriage and does not want to participate in the Catholic Church, can the one that is Catholic still take communion?
I would say in that instance, no, because the Catholic Church recognizes marriages that are not necessarily performed in and through the Catholic Church. So the assumption would be that that person is indeed married to probably the first of their former spouses. And if it was only one former spouse, then to their former spouse. What you would need to do is, in that instance, the non-Catholic spouse would still need to get an annulment. Now, if they don't want to participate in the Catholic Church or anything like that, that's fine. They don't have to. But for the sake of the Catholic spouse, the non-Catholic spouse in that situation would need to go through the process. And it may be a very easy process. For example, if they're not baptized, if they were married by a justice of the peace, and the fact, let's say they were married 4 times. Well, you only have to annul the first marriage because the other 3 in general would not be marriages in the eyes of the church because they were married that first time. So the process still has to be gone through by the non-Catholic spouse, but even if they don't want to participate in the life of the church, if they love their Catholic spouse, then that's something they would need to do for them. Does that make sense?
Yes. So what happens if they refuse and the Catholic can just never take communion again?
Well, possibly. Again, different situations would lead to different conclusions, but there could be ways that a church, a tribunal might be able to do something to help the Catholic, but that's something they would have to call the tribunal, the marriage tribunal in their diocese, and say, this is the situation, what can we do, if anything? And in nothing else, the Catholic can live with their spouse as brother and sister, and as long as the physical relations are not taking place, then the Catholic could go ahead and receive communion.
Okay.
All right.
Well, that helps. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Christy. Appreciate the phone call. A very special pre-taped edition of EWTN's Open Line Monday with our Monday host, Mr. John Martignoni. We're not taking your phone calls today. Getting 2017 kicked off here in grand fashion. We'll be back live taking your phone calls again next Monday on the 9th of January. And they need to store up their really, really, really incredible 2017 kickoff questions for next Monday.
Yeah, let's make it an all-star. Just the show should just be, people listening going, whoa, I'd never thought of that question before.
Is there one question since you got into the apologetics racket that you've always wanted to tackle that nobody's ever asked you? Have you studied something on your own and you said, no one has ever asked me about this?
No, I can't say. Nothing comes to mind immediately. It's generally the case that I don't study something because most of those things are
kind of the cardinal apologetics questions where most of them fit into a couple broad categories.
Right. There's about I'd say a dozen categories. Most of them fit into that category in some nuance or some way or shape or form. But usually it's the case somebody asks me a question, I'm like, I've never heard that before, and then I go study because it's some very, minute area or very minuscule area of the faith that, wow, who thought of that? But you got to admire people's minds for going there.
Open Line Monday with John Martignoni.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
So we're not really allowed, almost, to put something up that says, I am celebrating the birthday of the Messiah. You see, because it's something about church and state and all that monkey business. Why are we ashamed or afraid to say Christmas? Whose birthday is it? The winter? No. Santa Claus? No, that's St. Nicholas, and you're already gone. If you're in Italy, you celebrate the Magi, which is January 13th. That's when they give their gifts. Why? Because Christmas is the Father's gift to us. And we never give Jesus a gift. I don't know if we know anymore whose birthday it is. See, what we're supposed to celebrate is the birth of Jesus, Son of God.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Welcome to EWTN's Catholic Almanac.
It's January 2nd. St. Therese of Lisieux was born on this day in 1873. St. Therese is known as the Little Flower. She had total love and devotion to the child Jesus and demonstrated how small acts of everyday life could be offered to him. If you'd like to know more about St. Therese, log on to EWTN.com and click on Faith.
I'm in a good place in my life.
And I'm energized by new adventures.
I've got friends to laugh with.
And a good relationship.
But even though I'm kind of comfortable,
I sometimes wonder, is there something more?
Could God in church be what you're looking for? Come and see at CatholicsComeHome.com.
Tomorrow on EWTN Radio, Open Line host Barbara McWiggin takes all your calls on pro-life issues, 3 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
This is Father Larry Richards, host of EWTN Open Line Thursday.
Hello, this is Bishop Robert Baker from the Diocese of Birmingham.
This is Michael Warsaw, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of EWTN. Have a blessed Christmas and a Happy New Year from all of us at the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. We are not taking your phone calls today. This is a very special pre-taped edition of EWTN's Open Line Monday with your very own scriptural apologist extraordinaire, Mr. John Martignoni, here on this day after New Year's Day, 2017. Back to the phones we go. Joe is in Butte, Montana. He listens on Queen of Victory Radio. Joe, you're on with John Martignoni.
Thanks. John, I just want to thank you for everything you do on Open Line Monday and the Bible Christian Society.
Well, thank you, Joe.
I second that.
Well, thank you, Jack.
My question has to do with the Annunciation and translations. Last year, at the beginning of Advent, at the beginning of Luke, they read the Annunciation, and of course it said full of Mary, full of grace. But then I started the Little Rock Catholic Bible study the following week, and they used the New American Bible Revised Edition, and they read the same reading, and it said used favored instead of full of grace, highly favored. And so I was a little concerned that using one of the things that you talk about when we're trying to talk to people who believe in the Bible only, I wanted to be able to say the Holy Mary or Hail Mary prayer was, biblical. And also I think not using full of grace seemed to indicate there was anything special about it, and full of grace seems to indicate room for sin, or no room for sin. So
right.
I guess what I think doing a little research Gary Machuda and Carl Keating and Tim Staples and another Bible study I'm in, Jeff Caven's Great Adventure, they all talk about this Greek word, ketratomene. I don't know how to say it.
Ketratomene or something like that. I'm not a Greek scholar.
But
yeah, I'm not going to try it.
Okay. You're already too late.
I'm not going to try it again.
There you go.
Go ahead, Joe.
It seems pretty clear that means full of grace and a lot more. That she was filled with grace and it almost became permanent. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is there something about the New American Bible Revised Edition that I think I've read they're trying to be more inclusive, or priests at my Anaconda parish seem to indicate that maybe people from other faiths have some input, so that's why they use the highly favored instead of the full of grace?
I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't say it's beyond the realm of possibility, but the highly favored, to get to the crux of the matter, what is God's favor? That's what, should you ever come into a situation where someone says, oh, it doesn't say full of grace, it says highly favored. Number one, you say, well, that's your particular translation. I've got a translation here, the Revised Standard Version or whatever the translation may be that has full of grace. And it says, and you say, so that's my translation. And well, let's consult with some Greek scholars here. What's the word? What does it mean? But even if, for the sake of argument, let's say, okay, it's best translated as highly favored one. Well, number one, I don't think anyone else in all of the Bible. I think that's the only place that Greek word is used there in that way. Well, I think that Greek word, period. And so what exactly does it mean? Well, if you only have the word used one time in all of Scripture, it's very difficult to get an accurate translation sometimes. So there's that. But either way, highly favored, full of grace. Well, highly favored doesn't match the prayer as well as full of grace does, obviously. But ask someone who's a Protestant who may be objecting to the Hail Mary full of grace, what is God's favor? Is it not God's grace? Well, yes, it is. Favor means grace. When you're talking about God giving you favor, God is giving you grace. So essentially it means the same thing. And again, not being a Greek scholar, but just relying on same people you mentioned, Tim Staples, Scott Hahn, folks like that, who are much more scholarly in the Greek language. The Greek word there is something about a past and future perfect tense or something along those lines, but the perfect tense, which means it's not just for right now, it's past, present, and future that this person is full of grace or highly favored. So it has always been that way, is now, and always will be that way, that this person, in this instance Mary, is highly favored or full of grace. And so you get the argument and say, well, what does favor mean? Can we not say grace is the same thing as favor? Many Protestants I've talked to, well, yeah, I suppose so. God's favor is God's grace. Is God's grace not God's favor? Yes, it is. So you can still make the argument even with the translation. Why does the New American do it that way? I don't know. It very well could be they're collaborating with non-Catholic scholars, and they're coming up trying to make it more friendly for non-Catholics. I mean, we've had that in church architecture where they've turned, what could have been a really nice Catholic church in the shape of a cross or something into basically a gym that looks a lot like Protestant churches look. No difference, no distinction. So is that same thing going on here? I don't know for sure, but it could be. I wouldn't rule out the possibility. But what it all comes back to is, number one, even if they will not, the non-Catholic you may be discussing with will not accept grace as part of it, and they have a problem with it, they should accept favor as God's grace. And even if they don't do that, it's still not something that defeats any argument about Mary's immaculate conception and being without sin for all of her life. There are other things you can do. What I'm saying is this verse is not a linchpin argument for that, from the Scripture, for that doctrine or dogma. Okay?
Okay. I like the use of the Greek word in only one place.
Yeah,
not only does it not appear anywhere else in the Bible, it doesn't appear in common Greek speech either.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a word that they had to come up with. The writer, Luke, had to come up with this word to describe Mary. That's how unique she is.
All right, I like that because, I ran across your old nemesis, Matt Slick, saying it was St. Jerome made an unfortunate translation or whatever, but
yeah, as if he's more of a scholar on Greek and ancient Greek than St. Jerome was. So
okay.
Thanks, Joe. We
All right.
appreciate the phone call. God bless you. Hope you have a tremendous 2017. Thomas is in Seattle, Washington. He listens to EWTN on Sacred Heart Radio. Thomas, you're on with John Martignoni.
Hello, John.
Hey,
Thomas from Seattle.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, hey, I got a question about, I've been doing some little missionary work in the Philippines, and I have a question. It seems like there's a lot of SDA churches, Adventist, popping up, along the roads in the Philippines, and I kind of have a question. My question is, which is probably the most efficient or probably like the best biblical way to confront, or even historical way to confront the Adventists, the SDA, like
okay, and
talking about Ellen G. White or the Trinity or stuff like that.
The big thing with the Seventh-day Adventist is what they really, really dig into the Catholic Church on is that we moved the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday because their Sabbath, and the Jewish Sabbath is Saturday. That's the seventh day. Sunday is the first day of the week. So you Catholics, and they will say, and this is one thing where you could actually use Seventh-day Adventist testimony against other Protestants, because the Seventh-day Adventists will say, yes, the Catholic Church changed that. Other Protestants will go, well, the early Christians changed it. No, it's the Catholic Church that changed that. Well, and from when? What time? Well, from the very beginning. If you look in the Acts of the Apostles, there's 2 or 3 places where it talks about them meeting on the first day of the week. They met on the first day of the week. Paul was giving a sermon, and he gave such a long sermon, a kid in the window fell asleep and fell out and died. And Paul brought him back to life. And first day of the week where they collected money for the poor in Jerusalem from churches in the outlying areas. So first day of the week is in there. But what I do with the Seventh-day Adventist is I would take them to Colossians chapter 2. And in there, verse 16, Colossians, there was folks who were causing problems in the early church. There was a group of Jewish Christians, not all of them, but a particular group of them called the Judaizers, that were going to the Gentile converts to Christianity and saying, you have to follow all the Jewish laws in order to truly be Christian. And it comes to a head in Galatians 5 about circumcision. So, but the whole argument. And then that ends up with the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15, because of the Judaizers. Well, one of the things they're telling them, you have to worship on Saturday, you have to be circumcised, you have to do all the ablutions before meals, after meals, etc., and all of these things. You have to eat kosher, etc. Colossians is having this problem. So in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, it says this. Paul's telling them, therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink. He's telling the Gentile Colossians, don't let these Christian Judaizers pass judgment on you in regards to food and drink, to kosher food. Don't let them do it. Or with regard to a festival, because the Jews were saying you have to observe all the Old Testament festivals that we Jews observe, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. You know, why? Well, the Jews were saying, the Judaizers, you have to do this on Saturday. The Gentile Christians, it wasn't a thing for them. They were used to obviously meeting on Sunday, the first day of the week, which is when the Christians met. Now, the apostles, when they were first became Christian, when the church first started, the apostles still went to the synagogue. They still went to the temple. And then they met on Sunday, the first day, for their Christian observance, for the Mass and the teachings and the prayers, etc. Well, right here, Colossians 2, verse 16 and following, is what I would show to the Seventh-day Adventists and say, Paul says, he's talking about people like you judging folks on new moons, Sabbaths, what to eat and drink, etc. Paul says that that's wrong to do. So why are you doing that? And see what they say. And then also I would say, use that one. That's the first one. But go to Catholic.com. Catholic.com. Type in Seventh-day Adventist or just Adventist. And they'll have, I think they've got some tracts and some articles that you can use to get some other points as well. Okay?
Cool. Okay, John. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome, Thomas.
Appreciate the phone call.
Okay.
Have you heard about Church Pop?
Yes, I have. I get it. I get these emails.
Every morning. It's phenomenal. It's the most delightful blend of the irreverent to the deeply spiritual, and all of it 100% solid Catholic as well. And they had a video up this morning. I don't know if you looked at the video that was attached to your email, but a family of 11, a Catholic family of 11, 9 children, mom and dad, did a parody of the 12 Days of Christmas.
I didn't see it. I read it.
Absolutely hysterical. Basically answering every stereotypical thing you hear in society about large families. It is hysterical.
I'll have to, because I've still got it, so I'll have to go and watch it.
Yeah, just a phenomenal thing. Church Pop is the newest member of the EWTN family with new online Christian content that's fun and inspiring every day. Find it on Snapchat, Instagram, and on the web at churchpop.com. Chris is in the great state of New Jersey watching us on YouTube. Chris, you're on with John Martignoni.
Hi, how are you?
Doing all right.
I'm just wondering how to better prove apostolic succession from like Acts chapter 2, because in a sense we wouldn't say that the bishops are exactly apostles. So in what sense do they have the apostolic succession there?
Okay. It's Acts chapter 1, I would say, is a better place to go. It says, verse 15 and following, in those days Peter stood up among the brethren, and he's talking about Judas. And he goes on to say that in verse 20, he's quoting from Psalms, his office let another take. And in the King James Version, so if you're talking to Protestants, I always make sure I have a King James Version handy. In the King James Version, it says his bishopric let another take. Okay? Very important. So that's telling you what office they're talking about here. Judas held the office of bishop. The office holder is dead, gone, but there's still the office. So you can't have an empty office. So that's why Peter's saying his office let another take. So that's one of the best arguments right there that there is apostolic succession, because the apostles hold an office, and that office needs an office holder. And if one office holder dies, then the next office holder can take over. And that's very similar to what you see, in Isaiah chapter 22. Let me get there real quick. It's talking about Shebna and Eliakim, and how Eliakim will take Shebna's place in the office of essentially the prime minister. So you see it in the Old Testament, Isaiah 22, look at verse 15 and following, and then Acts chapter 1, verse 15 and following. And you've got that, hey, there's these offices that the apostles hold. They're called bishoprics, according to the King James Version. And once the office holder dies, just like the presidency, well, there's an office holder dies, removed from office for whatever reason, election, illness, whatever, impeachment, then you need a new office holder. So that's the initial thrust and the main thrust for why we can say that the bishops today are the successors of the apostles. Now, did they see Jesus as the original 12 apostles? No. So they're not the apostles, but they are holding the offices that were held by the apostles and that the apostles created more of as the church expanded outside of Jerusalem and into new territory. Does that help you out?
Yeah, it does, I think. But they're not, so you wouldn't say that they're exactly equal to, say, Paul or Peter, because they haven't seen the risen Lord, right? But do they succeed them in everything except that?
Basically, yes. And the Pope being the preeminent example of it, because he is the successor as Bishop of Rome of the Apostle Peter, who was the first head of the church, the first pope, if you will, the first head of the College of Bishops, and as leader of the apostles. So Pope Francis, I guess, is the 266th pope, I believe. So he's in a preeminent way a successor of the apostles, but all of the other bishops as well.
Next up is Ed. He's in Atlanta, Georgia. He listens on EWTN.com as well. Ed, what's your question today for John?
Hi, John. Thanks for taking my call. Mine is about the glorified bodies. When we die, my understanding is we have a glorified bodies in heaven. If we're blind, we can see. Is Jesus' body glorified in heaven? The thing I'm thinking is when Thomas saw him, put his hands in the, wounds and the fingers in the wounds. Will Jesus' body in heaven have the open wounds, and does that pertain to the Mass and the sacrifice at all, if it's not?
Yes, it will. If you look in Revelation, is it chapter 1 where he says it? Trying to find it real quick. He talks about seeing one looking as though they had been slain. The lamb that looked as though it had been slain. Well, he's talking about Jesus Christ. Well, what do you think he was looking at that it looked like the lamb, Jesus, had been slain? He's looking at his wounds in his hands and feet and side. So all indications are that, yes, Jesus's body, his glorified body, he had the wounds in his appearance, as you mentioned, to the apostles in the upper room. And Thomas, even a few weeks later, Thomas, Jesus invites him, put your hand, in the hole in my hand and in my side. So his glorified body on earth had it, his glorified body in heaven more than likely will as well. Again, as the testimony from St. John in Revelation about the lamb looking as though it had been slain. Okay?
That, where our bodies won't look like that when we get there, our injuries will be healed. Why wasn't Christ?
Well, ask him when you get there. Because so that we know, we'll know, but an eternal reminder of who did what for us. Maybe I couldn't really say, but but based on what it says in Revelation, that he looks as though he had been slain. It seems to me that John had to have been looking at the wounds of the crucifixion.
Hilda sent us a text, John. She says, where does it say in the Bible that the path to heaven is short and narrow and the door to hell is long and wide?
Well, it doesn't really say that. It says the path is narrow and difficult. Doesn't necessarily say short. And, hang on real quick. Let me, if I can look up something here real quick. Narrow. And this is what I always try to teach people. There's if you go online, lots of good
Matthew
sites.
7:13.
That you can, well, see, you beat me to it. Matthew 7:13 and 14. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. The gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So that's where that is.
And then we have one other text here, if I can get to it. Well, I lost it. See, I was fast for a second, but not so much. It's actually a YouTube question from Timoteo, and he says, why do some accuse the Catholic Church of basing some of the Church's teachings on pagan practices?
Well, that's something that they're trying any way, shape, or form, and in many times it's very desperate, to discredit the Catholic Church. Okay, well, we can't discredit it. We can't say, well, that's not in the Bible. Oops, that is in the Bible. Mary, confession, the Pope, etc., the sacraments, the Eucharist, works as being necessary for salvation, and all these things that the Catholic Church teaches. So you can't discredit the teachings. You can't discredit the Scripture scholarship. You can't discredit the philosophy. You can't discredit the miracles. So you got to find some way to discredit this church. Oh, let's say it's pagan practices adopted from the Babylonians, the ancient Egyptians, this, that. It's for the most part shoddy scholarship that does these types of things. And so that's why they say it, because they're trying to discredit the church, but it's a desperate attempt that is not verified most of the time, if not all of the time, by solid historical scholarship.
Where can they find more of what you do?
BibleChristianSociety.com. BibleChristianSociety.com. Everything's free.
2017 off to a flying start. On behalf of our host, John Martignoni, producer Elena Rodriguez, and celebrity call screener Rich Jesse, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, God bless.